Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do a book haul revisit. Last year, in 2019, in the month of August, I brought a lot of books into my library, 16 to be exact. So let's check in with the progress on those. Spoiler alert, the progress I've made on reading these titles is not good at all. I have not read most of them, the vast majority. But a lot of these books are titles that I picked up at my local used bookstore, and not only that, a lot of them were in the discount section of the local used bookstore. So, although there are a lot of titles here, there's actually not a lot of money that was invested in this. Or at least that's what I'm telling myself. Maybe. First, I want to do a final reminder that the 3K Q&A is coming up later this week. So if you have a question for me, don't leave it on this video. I will put a link down below to my 3K Q&A announcement video. Follow that link, leave your comment on that video, because it's going to be a lot easier for me to have the questions all in one place than to look for them all around. So if you have a question, follow that link, leave a comment on that video, and I will film sometime this week, maybe tomorrow, maybe Wednesday, I don't know, and I'll have it up by the end of the week. So if you're interested in the Q&A, head down to the link down there and leave me a comment on the Q&A video itself. If you do leave a comment, thank you. I really appreciate it. I've gotten a lot of good questions already, but it never hurts to have more. So let's dive in. The first one is a success story. Thank goodness. It's Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. I had ordered this at this time last year because it had made the Booker Prize long list. The shortlist was going to be announced within about a week of when I did my book haul in the month of August. And obviously this had not made the shortlist yet, but it was one of the titles that had really jumped out at me off of the long list. And I did manage to read it in the month of June as a buddy read. I have a review of it. I will link it down below. Since this is the co-winner of the Booker Prize, eventually it went on to earn that title. I think everybody probably knows what this is about, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it, except to say that this is the rare success story that I will have in this book haul revisit. That's Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. Next is Song of the Loon by Richard Amory. I had read The Stonewall Reader in the month of June last year, and in it they referenced this book because, I forget the man's name, but he owned a gay bookstore in New York City, referenced that he had originally resisted the idea of carrying this book, and then eventually gave in and started carrying it because it was so popular. And I looked into it and found that Song of the Loon was, in the late 60s, the most popular gay novel at the time, and which, you know, is a very niche market, especially in the 1960s, but it made me very curious, so I looked into it and found that Arsenal Pulp Press had published what they call Little Sisters Classics, which are LGBTQ books that were in danger of being forgotten, and this is one of them. So I ordered a copy of it, and I have not gotten around to reading it, but how fun is that cover? It was the most popular gay book of the 1960s. It is a lusty gay frontier romance. I mean, how do you say no to that? About Ephraim McIver, a 19th century outdoorsman, and his travels through the American wilderness, where he meets a number of men who share with him stories, wisdom, and intimate encounters. Unique among pulp novels at the time, the gay characters in Song of the Loon are strong and romantically drawn, traits which have earned this book a place in the canon of gay American literature, and I'm really looking forward to reading it at some point. This is something that I'm definitely, even if I don't get to it for a long time, I will be happy to have on my bookshelf. And while I was looking into that, I found a bunch of other Little Sisters classics, including Larry Duplechan's Blackbird, which I'm really looking forward to. I had put it on my TBR for the month of June, when I always do LGBTQ books in the month of June to celebrate Pride. This year I had tried to celebrate, or focus most intently on Black queer stories, and this really fit the bill for that, but I did not get around to it, so I need to try to fit this in at some point soon. Because what really made this one jump out to me at the time was that, published in 1986, it's a funny, moving coming-of-age novel about growing up Black and gay in Southern California, and that is really what appealed to me about this type of story. It's even today, it's the type of story that you don't, or the type of coming out story specifically, that you don't really hear about. You know, we've had the movie Moonlight, which won Best Picture, but it still gets overlooked too much. So of course the interest that it's set in 1986 to see how much has changed, but the fact that it is an overlooked story, or a traditionally overlooked story, really appealed to me a great deal, and I am looking forward to reading it at some point. And the final Little Sisters classic that I got was Patience and Sarah by Isabel Miller, which is not going to cooperate with the lighting a little bit. But this is another one that had seemed really interesting to me because it focuses on a lesbian relationship. Set in the 19th century, Isabel Miller's classic lesbian novel traces the relationship between Patience White, a painter, and Sarah Dowling, a farmer, whose romantic bond does not sit well with the puritanical New England farming community in which they live. Ultimately, they are forced to make life-changing decisions that depend on their courage and their commitment to one another. This was originally self-published in 1969 and then was hand-sold by the author on New York City street corners until it gained attention, and it was eventually received the American Library Association's first Gay Book Award in 1971, which is another thing that made this seem really interesting to me. So all of, even if I don't get to these and the next book anytime soon, they are things that I am really looking forward to having in my library. And the final one that fits that is Becoming a Man, Half a Life Story by Paul Monette. Paul Monette is an LGBTQ author that I've been meaning to get to for a very long time and have not. And part of that was that I never had any of his titles in my library. This just happened to be available at my local indie, and I picked it up because I feel like it was something that I had not seen in a store before, and I feel like when you see things like that carried in a store, reward the store for having it, reward the publisher for putting it out, and you'll hopefully eventually see more of the titles that you like or that interest you. So this is really specifically about Paul Monette's life. He was a child of the 1950s from a small New England town where he was known as Perfect Paul, and he earned straight A's and shined in social and literary pursuits, all the while keeping a secret from himself and the rest of the world, struggling to be, or at least to imitate, a straight man. Through Ivy League halls of privilege and bohemian travels abroad, loveless intimacy and unrequited passion, Paul Monette was haunted and finally saved by a dream of the thing I'd never even seen: two men in love and laughing. Part of what really interests me in this story is that my father was born in the 1950s. He was secretly gay for a very long time, obviously married a woman and had children, and eventually came out of the closet. But I because of that, I'm always really interested in stories like this, and they have a special place in my heart. So that is another one that I'm really, if nothing else, I'm happy to have in my library. And then, this is not actually the edition that I hauled. I had to replace it with a different one. It's Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I have the tiniest version of it ever. But this is, again, not the one that I hauled back in August. It's a really pretty cover. I don't know if you can see. Somebody thought I was reading the Bible when I was reading this, which is kind of funny. But anyway, so I hauled Little Women back then, and then I did a buddy read of Little Women in December with Britta Bowler, where I found out that the edition that I had hauled at that time was only half of the story. In the United States, they sometimes publish Little Women in two separate versions because technically part 2, where the March sisters are grown up, was published separately originally. Now, a lot of publishers have started putting them together, but not all do. Usually in Europe and places like that, you'll get them together all the time. But in the United States, you need to be careful, and I had happened to pick up a version that only had half of the story. So I ran out and picked up this instead, and I unhauled the other one and got rid of it because I only really need one, and this is actually a really cute copy. So that's Little Women, and that is another success story. I have read it, and I even saw the movie adaptation that was released afterwards. This one I picked up, this was actually in the discount section of the used bookstore. It is Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout, a Pulitzer Prize winner. I picked this up having already read it. It's something I want to revisit as part of my Pulitzer Prize project. So there was a very specific reason this one and one other were brought into my library. It was not so I could read them in the immediate future. It was so I could revisit them at some point, having already read them. So if you're unfamiliar, Olive Kitteridge is a series of interconnected stories that either directly or indirectly include the title character, Olive Kitteridge. I remember thinking it was fine, but not really liking it all that much. But I do really want to revisit it because I know a lot of people are huge fans of it. And I think there are parts of it that really spoke to me at the time, and I don't remember it all that well, to be honest. So I feel like I need to have a revisit with it and try it at some point. So this one was brought in not because of a sense of urgency that I need to read it, but so I have it when my Pulitzer Prize project circles around to it. Then there was Away in the World by V.S. Naipaul. This was also in the discount section of my local used bookstore, and I picked it up because it sounded like a really interesting book that I had not even heard of, by an author who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And maybe this one was, it was $1, so I can't call it a mistake, really. But also, I picked it up knowing I was probably not going to get to it for a very long time, if at all. But it sounded interesting. This is spanning continents and centuries and defying literary categories. Away in the World tells intersecting stories whose protagonists include the disgraced and half-demented Sir Walter Raleigh, fruitlessly seeking El Dorado in the New World, the foppishly 19th century insurgent Francisco Miranda, who in his quest to liberate South America becomes entangled in his own fantasies and borrowed ideas, and the doomed Blair, a present-day Caribbean revolutionary stranded and eventually martyred in East Africa. Among these presences is a narrator who bears a telling resemblance to V.S. Naipaul himself, a Trinidadian writer of Indian ancestry and English residence boldly trying to come to terms with the mystery and transience that is his inheritance and ours. It sounds really interesting, right? And it was only $1. So even if I have a lot of books that I've found in my library tour that I've had on my shelf for roughly 20 years that I have not gotten to, so even if this ends up being one of them, it was only $1. And it is what it is. So we'll see. It's like a longer term thing. I'm not surprised I didn't get to it in the last year. Then there is Breath, Eyes, Memory by Edwidge Danticat. This was also actually in the discount section of my local used bookstore. I've wanted to read Edwidge Danticat for a very, very long time. So finding a cheap version of one of her books was just a really nice thing. And again, there wasn't necessarily any sense of urgency in getting to it quickly. It's just something I want to have on my shelf so I can eventually read one of her books. This one is about Sophie Cacao, who is 12 years old and is sent from her impoverished village to New York to be reunited with a mother she barely remembers. There she discovers secrets that no child should ever know, and a legacy of shame that can be healed only when she returns to Haiti to the women who first reared her. What ensues is a passionate journey through a landscape charged with the supernatural and scarred by political violence, in a novel that bears witness to the traditions, suffering, and wisdom of an entire people. And that is exactly why Edwidge Danticat is an author that I've been meaning to get around to reading for a very long time, and I really need to at some point. I've also been kind of eyeing her story collection from last year, Everything Inside, I believe is the title of it. It just came out in paperback. And yeah, so I'm happy to have this on my shelf, and I will get to it hopefully someday, because like I said, that's an author I really want to get to. This is another one that was in the discount section of my local used bookstore, and it was picked up for exactly the same reason as Olive Kitteridge. It's Stone Diaries by Carol Shields, which won the Pulitzer Prize back in 1995 or 1996, and I did read it somewhere around the year 2000, and I hated it. But so in the year 2000, I would have been 18. Maybe I read it in 2001 when I was 19. I don't think I was either old enough or mature enough to really appreciate what this book is doing. So I want to revisit it now that I'm a proper adult with some life under my belt and see, because this is really dealing with the ways in which women can become invisible in their lives or be made invisible. And I want to get back to that. It kind of follows the life of Daisy Stone Goodwill, from her calamitous birth in Manitoba in 1905 to her journey with her father to Indiana. Throughout her years as a wife, mother, and widow, she has struggled to understand her place in the world. Now she listens, she observes, and through sheer force of imagination, she becomes a witness to her own life, her birth, her death, and the troubling misconnections she discovers in between. With irony and humor, Carol Shields weaves together the poignant story of this 20th century pilgrim in search of herself, and in doing so, she creates a story that is a paradigm of our unsettled era. So it didn't work for me when I was 19. Hopefully it will work for me. I mean, I'm 38 now, but whenever I get around to rereading it as part of my Pulitzer Prize project, because this is one I definitely want to experience another time. And then we get to The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I read The Age of Innocence on my own because I had never read any Edith Wharton books, and I just loved it. So I've wanted to read more by Edith Wharton, and I found this Dover Thrift Edition in the discount section of my local used bookstore. Again, it was $1, which I think is what Dover Thrift Editions are anyway, which is probably why it was in the discount section. And I have not gotten around to it yet, but Edith Wharton is definitely an author I want to read more of. If you haven't read The Age of Innocence, oh my god, it is fantastic. And I'm really looking forward to The House of Mirth as well. And then we have, I believe, the final novel that was in the discount section of my local used bookstore. It's A Summons to Memphis by Peter Taylor, and this is actually one of the Pulitzer Prize Project titles that I am most looking forward to because it's about a complicated family, and I love books about a complicated family. They just speak to me. So since it was in there, I figured I had to pick it up because it's something I'm really looking forward to reading at some point when my Pulitzer Prize project loops around to it. If I remember correctly, because it does not have a plot description on the back of the book. If I remember correctly, the title character is summoned to Memphis, where he grew up and where his family still resides, by his sister because there is conflict. I believe his father is remarrying and the sisters don't approve of his fiancée. So he goes back home and chaos ensues. And that just sounds like a premise. It's a very familiar premise, but it's one that I tend to enjoy. Just because, as I said, I really like complicated families in books. It works for me. So I'm really looking forward to that still. Then, while I was in that used bookstore, I found a copy of Ohio by Stephen Markley, which was a book that had totally flown under my radar. But I've heard so many good things about from people on BookTube who have read it, and they happened to have this advanced reader's edition at the used bookstore, so I picked it up and have not gotten around to it, but it's still something that is on my radar and I would like to get to. I'm not making any hard and fast decisions about what to haul or what to unhaul out of this year, maybe next year when I do haul revisits, and if I had a little more time and space away from when I purchased the books, I'll think about that. But this is something that, at least for now, I am still looking to get to because I've heard so many good things about it. I believe it's people former classmates who, On a feverish summer night in 2013, 4 former classmates converge on the Rust Belt town where they grew up, each with a mission, all of them haunted by regrets, secrets, lost loves. And it's very much about the things that they grew up with: war, recession, political gridlock, racial hostility, and this simmering fear of environmental calamity. I've heard that this book also deals with the opioid crisis in America, and there have been some people who read this and did not enjoy it, but for the most part, I've heard wildly positive things about Ohio by Stephen Markley, so I'm looking forward to that at some point. Now we have 2 books that I actually purchased from my library, but again, when my library sells used books, they sell them for, I think, 50 cents for a paperback, $1 for a hardcover. So I got Ironweed by William Kennedy, which is another Pulitzer Prize winner and will be part of my Pulitzer Prize project, for like 50 cents. So even if I don't get to it for a really long time, it's a title that I'm going to read at some point. And as you can see, I had just decided that I was going to do the Pulitzer Prize project at this time last year. So I was very busily accumulating titles as if I was going to start tearing through the project. I have not torn through the project. I've only done one so far. Lonesome Dove was the first book that I finished for the project. I will link my review of that book down below. But at some point I will be getting to Ironweed. I feel like this is a book that I would enjoy. There is no description on the back of the book. This is a movie tie-in, actually. Meryl Streep and I believe Jack Nicholson were in the film. Yeah, Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson, for whatever that's worth. But so this is something that I am keeping around because it will be part of my project, because I think it is something that I will like, I hope, at least. So I'll get to it. Then, Rabbit is Rich. I've actually gotten 3 John Updike books from my library that they were selling, and 2 of them are potentially supplemental titles because John Updike wrote 4 books about Harry Rabbit Angstrom. 2 of them won Pulitzers, and I'm feeling like I should read the whole series because Lonesome Dove was published as a standalone novel, and then Larry McMurtry went back and wrote sequels and prequels later. So I don't feel like I need to read the sequels or the prequels in order to experience Lonesome Dove. But these, where they're published in chronological order and build off of each other, I kind of feel like I might need to. So I'm wrestling with that. But Rabbit is Rich is one of the Pulitzer Prize winners in that series. I'm not really excited about reading a John Updike book. If you follow along, you've heard me talk about that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it now, but there it is. And the final title that I hauled in the month of August last year was Dominicana by Angie Cruz, which I still have not gotten around to reading. It is shortlisted for the Women's Prize, I believe, and I believe the announcement for that is coming up, so I should start paying attention. I've heard very mixed things about this on BookTube and just in the media in general, but it's a story that really kind of appealed to me. So it's about a woman who, in the 1960s, I believe it's an arranged marriage, if I remember correctly, that sends her to New York City, where she's isolated on her own, separated from her family, in a country that is unfamiliar to her. And over time, I believe she ponders an escape from that marriage. But it appeals to me as a New Yorker. It appeals to me because it is an immigrant story. It appeals to me because it's set in the past. So I'm always interested in any of those things. So, and it's about there are family dynamics involved, and as I said, I really love complicated family stories. So this is something I'm still interested in reading and trying for myself. Like I said, there's been positive feedback on it, negative feedback on it. So this is one that I feel like at some point I need to read and make up my own mind about. And that is Dominicana by Angie Cruz. So those are the 16 books that I brought into my library in August. I read 2 of them since then. That's Girl, Woman, Other and Little Women, and 2 of them I had already read, Olive Kitteridge and The Stone Diaries, but would like to revisit at some point. So out of 16, there are 12 books still to be read and 14 books total that I intend to read at some point, with 2 books that I have read and in both cases really enjoyed very much. So if you have any recommendations based on these, if you have thoughts about any of these books, I would love to hear it. Maybe tell me to stay away from one of them. Let me know. Or if you really particularly love one of them and think I should get to it soon, let me know. Leave that comment down below. And that is everything for this book haul, revisiting what I brought into my library in August of 2019. So again, comments, questions, leave them down below. And just one more shout out, if you have a question for my Q&A, I will link the video down below. Don't leave your question on this video. Follow the link to the Q&A announcement and leave the comment on that video. Just make it easy for me. Anyway, if you've made it this far into this video, I really appreciate your time. Thank you. If you follow along, thank you even more. And as always, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.